All right, just making a little 3/4 inch cut. Pretty clean. Yeah. Pretty clean. Okay, so that cut goes right in here. We'll have to take a measurement here to go from inside to inside. So, and then we'll make an adjustment in our frame jig to locate this in a repeatable way. Okay, so we've got this end coped, and I was just getting ready to mark this as to where to cut right up in this area. And I kind of realized I'm not really sure how level these two, the rear seat fender shock hoop is. It's hard to get a level at this angle. So I've come up with another solution or attempt. I've just taken a piece of 1x1 here and welded a couple of bungs to it, and that allowed me to make this, again, having some scrap pieces of metal around, where I could kind of put this over the top, and that would allow me to place a level between here and attempt to level these bars. So you know, anyway, the threaded rod screws into the two bungs here. Let's see if we can do this. Wait a minute. Try to get those somewhat bottomed. Okay, and we've got this resting back here in our rear support and these side supports, and now I'm going to thread this down. I just got a couple of wing nuts on there to try to get that into a level and to have it tight up against the frame rails, the front frame tubes. See if we can kind of pull this in. And again, to try to come up with something that's largely repeatable. Might have this one just a little bit too tight. Okay, you can see now how that's pretty darn level, and it's got these tubes here very tight on these front frame rails, so I feel pretty good about getting a dimension here. Okay, so we've got it in there pretty level, and I feel pretty good now knowing this is level about going ahead and marking this cross tube. You know, it's going to be marked, you know, just on this inside edge, and then coped and then put in position. Now that I know that's all level and tight. So we'll take a cope. Okay, we've got everything back in place. This is level across the seat. The rear mount is level and tight. So now I will take my little square here, and I'm going to make a mark on this cross piece right where that touches both the inner edge and then the top here. And that's going to allow us to make a mark on the inner area here where the cope goes. So it'll be the most narrowest part of the cope here. And then we'll do that. Yeah, I just made a cut on it so I don't have to go the full circle. Just cut off the part that's not going to be included anyway, just to save the blade a little bit. Okay, not bad. Whoops. Okay, so let's just take a quick look here and see how it's going to work out. All right, here's the piece that we just coped. And you can see it doesn't quite fit, but that's just, you know, loosely with hand. You know, if you've done it just right, you're going to have this. It's literally just going to tap into position and kind of hold itself. Not the end of the world if it's loose, but this is actually a little better. And once it gets horizontal, gets a little bit looser just because it's not got the angle, the wider angle here. So to me, that's just damn near perfect. Now I need to get another measurement here because I don't exactly know what this distance here should be. This is roughly where it should be. And you know, there'll be a big tank mounting strap that'll come down here and attach here. So you don't want too much of a gap to the rear of the tank. But that's a standard dimension. I'll just have to get it and then make a way for that dimension to be repeatable as well. But that's good. In that we've got it secure here, we've got it secure here, we've got it level here, we've got it level here. You know, we've got our angle here because we know the height of the shock mounts here. We know where those have to be. So this is, you know, this looks good. Okay, so while we're set up to make cuts here, I've just set up a 45-degree cut. And that 45 degrees is to cover this piece that goes up to the upper shock mount here. So there'll be again another piece of 3/4 inch tubing. But I know from some of the documentation that this angle here is a 45-degree angle. So we'll go ahead and make that. Still working on our sort of seat shock mount hoop rear part of this frame jig, and I'm reminded of the sort of analogy of building the pyramids. You know, the pyramids are impressive, but the scaffolding that it took to build the pyramids, now that was impressive. And so I'm starting to kind of get into that realm here just to mount this cross tube, or this rear 45, or not 40, but probably closer to 40 degrees. I've got it kind of basically coped and roughed into position here, tapping into rear of the frame here. And I'm just trying to think of a way to mount this just for welding. And what I've done is I've taken a piece of 1x1 off of this temporary piece that we have in here to level and control the front end here. And so I'm thinking of taking off sort of a spur here, so it would again be part of this removable piece. And I had some pieces from sort of a different project for frame building that have a sliding piece here and a bolt in it, and I welded on a little tab here so that I could clamp this down and sort of create this angle. And it seems pretty good, so I'm thinking of going ahead and welding this piece or tacking it on here so I can go a little bit further with how this would work. There are a few more subtleties to this rear piece sort of than you realize. Just the way it mounts, and it's not exactly straight, and it's not exactly 45 degrees, so it's hard to come up with a sort of a rigid, typical frame jig mount for this. I think at best it's going to be something that's clamped on and just kind of held in place, and then you tack it and then move it. So this whole apparatus is really just for getting those first few tacks. And I think in reality, with some of the angles involved here, there's always going to be a little bit of fudge in positioning these and getting the copes tied, and so I don't want to come up with a rigid solution, in other words. So I think I'll go ahead and tack this piece, this external spur here, down and take it a few more steps. So we'll take a look at that here as we get closer. Okay, I've got it back in position, just tacked into position here and mocked up here. Actually, I need to tweak that cope a little bit, but you can see it's doing a pretty good job of holding that support at the correct angle. It's not clamped in real hard, so there's a little bit of play here, but I think this is fully adjustable, a full range of adjustability in this angle here. So I think it's going to work in terms of supporting this to pick up this angle enough to make the tack welds and hold it in position. So, I think we're going to call that good enough to continue. I might put a different kind of brace underneath this bolt head so it gets a little bit larger area to clamp against as needed. Little things, there's always little tweaks, but I think it looks pretty good. All right, let's take a look at this. This should be our seat mount template. So we'll give it a shot. Okay, so the fixture we just cut on the plasma cutter, I have here on the back end of our frame jig and frame. And I'm using it there are two brackets here. There's a kind of a fender bracket that mounts across the shock mount brackets. And then there's a front supporting bracket here that's also used as a seat mount. And so I've got some bolts running through, and those are locating these two brackets. Again, the goal, as we've harped on here from the very start of this, is repeatability. So this fixture comes all the way back here and touches this rear sort of stop. And so once that touches that stop, these distances are fixed, are indexed. And so when we tack these in, they're going to be in the proper position, at least according to the drawings and dimensions that I can see, always subject to tweaks. But I think this is a good starting point. And, you know, this comes off, and you can see where the brackets are mounted. I put some little rubber bumpers on here to get it at the right height. So when we put this back in position, it allows us to find that locating distance, you know, pretty repeatable. All right, so I'll just have to make one more of these down tubes here, which I've already made on the other side, and I'll just grab that dimension, cope those, and set that in, and then we'll move on. All right, I've decided to take another support off of this rear shock mount seat hoop bracket, and this will go up to the front where we have a little cross tube and also the anchor points for a strap that holds the tank down, and that will locate those through this shaft here. Where did I put them? Here they are. Little bitty brackets used to hold down the tank strap. So anyway, I've decided to go ahead and tack that on now. Okay, so here's that bracket in position again. Same one we've been working on, with this extra part coming off one by one. And you can see how it comes up, and I use it to locate this cross tube and also the little brackets here that are used to hold the tank down, a tank strap that comes down. And I'm using the width, the 1-inch width, to establish the width of these two brackets here, and then on the other side over here. And I've actually added a little washer in there behind it, so it's not exactly a 1-inch width. That'll give a little play if the strap is basically 1 inch. So that definitely holds these tiny little brackets in position for tacking those in right here, and being removable and repeatable. So just tacked in these little tank retaining strap tabs here, and I also just put a little tack here on this cross piece here and here. You can see clearly that's silicon bronze. So next I'm going to go ahead and tack this forward seat mount into position using this locating bracket that we CNC'd yesterday. And so just get a little tack here and here on those, so that can all kind of start to take shape. We'll have to wait on this rear one with the fender mount until these shock mount tabs are tacked in. Okay, so I'm just putting this cross brace back on here to hold these shock mount locations very tight. And you can see we've got sort of this triangular support done on this side, and then done the same thing on this side, and I've got them held pretty tight in our support bracket here that will come out, and have them coped at both ends, down here on both sides. And one of the things I'm planning on doing is to weld them here first before we put the shock mounting plate on. And the reason is, if we put this plate down, there's not going to be a really good way to get a weld on this piece of tubing. So I'm going to weld that, probably have to grind it off so that this mounting plate can come down into its final position here, and then you would weld all down through here and in this cope. So a little tricky in terms of getting a good weld all in here in terms of the order of assembly. So I may go ahead and tack these into position, take this whole subframe off and weld it on, you know, on the table, on the support, or in the vise here, and then put it back on to finally weld it into position with the shock mount and attached to the front tubes, yada yada, as they say. But I think the, you know, one thing I'm liking, at least so far, is the way these mounts allow a lot of flexibility to get this angle exactly where you want it and not have it constantly falling off or having to use a magnet. Magnets are okay, but you weld around them and they throw off the TIG torch, and I don't use them a lot, a little bit. So that's kind of the state of where we are. Like I say, I'll probably tack these on here next to start to get this weld that will be covered up by the bracket in position and done, and then put it all back together, and then come in and tack on these shock mount supports, which do a lot of the heavy lifting on this frame, supporting your rear swing arm and all the action. So that's just sort of the state. And you can see this one cross piece we tacked on with this, our little bracket. Seems to be working. We might have to make a Mark II of that so it holds itself better. So that's it.